Okay, welcome back guys. Right now our game is working okay, in the sense that we can move and we can jump, but we cannot double jump. And as you can see, if I want to reach that platform at the top, there is really no way for me to do that. And it is very common for games to have double jumping features. And really, I think if you build a game where people cannot double jump and you do not really care about that functionality, it is gonna be a bit weird because players expect double jump nowadays. So yes, let's fix that. Let's go to our player controller, and the first thing I want to add here is the number of jumps allowed. How many jumps do we want to allow the user to do? Because if the user is already in air, how many more jumps can the user do while in air? So jumps, let's see, jumps allowed is going to be a public float, which we can set, of course, in the editor. So jumps allowed, let's set it to 3, like this. Okay, now we need to also keep track of how many jumps we've done. So while we are allowed to do 3 jumps, how many jumps have we already done? So this is something that we will have to keep track of. So let's create a variable called times jumped, how many times we've jumped. And from the beginning, this is gonna be 0. So when the game starts, this is gonna be 0. And so we go down here, and instead of having this Boolean variable, which is basically only keeping track of whether we're jumping or not, instead of using that, we're gonna be checking if the number of times we've jumped is less than jumps allowed. So as long as we have not jumped more times than is allowed without touching the ground, then we can jump. And really we can remove this jumping is equal to true here. We can remove the whole variable. So instead of setting jumping to true, we will do ++ here. So we're adding 1 to times jumped. And when we touch the ground, then we set this to 0. So times jumped equal to 0. Yes. Let's remove this is jumping altogether because we don't need it anymore. Like this. So let's see if it works. Let's see if it works. Let's see, I can move back and forth, and then I can also jump. But see, this is an issue with the current code. And that is the fact that I do not need to let go of the button in order for this function to run several times, because jump input is gonna be it's gonna be between 0 and 1 several times. Even this function is gonna be run many times per second. So this condition is gonna be true many times the first second. And we want to avoid that. We want to only run this piece of code that is inside here only when I've touched the button and then I've released the button. And then when I touch the button again, well, then I can run this code again. Because otherwise we will be running this code, several times a second, and this number of times jumped will increase very fast. I mean, it's increasing extremely fast. We cannot even notice that anything is happening. So you see, if I run it right now and I press the up arrow, well, right now we've already run it several times. And I can prove it to you by just debugging here. So let's see, debug.log. Let's see, jumping. So let's save it and let's run, and let's see what the game writes to us in the console right here. So see, I'm just touching the up arrow, and you see already we've jumped so many times. I've only touched it once. So really, when I'm touching the up arrow, I only want to jump one time, and then I want to release the up arrow, and then I want to jump the second time. So that is why we need an extra variable. We need to run this piece of code only when we have the up arrow only and only when we have not jumped more than we're allowed to jump, and only if the previous jump input was 0. So only when the previous recorded jump input is 0 can we jump again. So this is very important. So right here, let's create a new variable which is float, and it's gonna be previous jump input. And from the beginning is gonna be 0. And this is where we have to put another condition that, you know, only run this code if this is true and if this is true, but also previous jump input needs to be 0. So we need to release the button, the up arrow, before we can run this piece of code again. So that is why we do this. And then after we're finished, we can say previous jump input is equal to current jump input. So that the next time we run fixed update, we have now updated the previous jump input to the current one. And so if I run the game right now and I press go, you'll see that if I jump, I can jump again and again and again. So 1, 2, 3. And this is the number of jumps allowed. You see, 3 times. And obviously we can change it to, for example, 5. And run the game again. And if I do now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I cannot jump anymore. So this is how the game works. And if you go back to the code once again, I know that it might be a bit frustrating from the beginning, because I understand that this might be a bit hard to understand, the fact that, you know, previous jump input needs to be 0. But just think about this, you know, fixed update function being called all the time. Even if you just have pressed the button and you keep the button pressed, this is gonna be running and it's gonna give you jump input that is more than 0 if you just keep the arrow pressed. So we want the user to press the button, but we don't want to jump several times before the user releases the button and then presses again. So that is why we have this extra condition that, hey, even though button is pressed, even though we can jump, make sure that the user actually released the button before jumping. So be sure that the previous value you saw, the previous jump input you saw, is actually 0. And just keep in mind that this is running all the time. This code right here is running many times per second. So by keeping it in mind, I think you will understand why. So guys, thanks so much. I'll see you in the next lecture.